I introduce to you the next Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Broxtowe, and thank you all for being here today, and thank you, Sue, and all the young women members of this party for the way you introduced this rally and started things off. I have to say that Broxtowe is a truly exceptional constituency Labour Party. The way you're embedded and involved with the community, it's very, very impressive, and that is the reason that Greg is going to be your next MP. And I also say a big thank you to Gloria, to Richard and to Emily for being here today and for what they've said today in their contributions. Because Labour is a family, Labour is a cause, Labour for me is my life. And I'm very sad at people who've left our party. I really am. And I say this to them. In June 2017, I was elected on a manifesto. Emily was elected on a manifesto. Richard was elected on a manifesto. Gloria was elected on a manifesto. It was the same manifesto. A manifesto that promised to end austerity. A manifesto that promised to end student fees. A manifesto that promised to bring into public ownership rail, mail and water. It was a manifesto that was to be transformative to the lives of people of this country. And so when the media talk about the bravery of those that walk away, Anna Soubry voted for austerity and said it was a good thing. Almost immediately after leaving, Chris Leslie tells us that we should not be ending university fees, that we should not be doing that, we should not be increasing the tax for the richest in the country, we should be cutting corporation tax and increasing the burden on others. Well, I tell you what, the Labour Party believes in equality and justice. That is what was the centre of our manifesto, and that will be at the centre of the next manifesto whenever that election comes. And I remind them, as Emily did and others did, that the increase in the Labour vote in the 2017 election was the biggest in any election since 1945. That was because our party campaigned, the community campaigned. People got together and started talking about politics, about life, about how our society could be run. It wasn't the old transactional politics, it was the involved politics of the future. And what's different now about Labour is the membership is much bigger, 3 times the size it used to be, but it's also much more involved with the communities, and it's those communities and those members that will be making the policies, that will write the manifestos for the future. And I am utterly determined to achieve that. Now, I have been in the past 3 days. In the past 3 days, I've been in Brussels, and I've been in Madrid, and I've come here. I've been there representing the Labour Party to meet our friends and colleagues in various socialist parties and groupings across Europe. And I've been talking to them about how we deal with the issues of Brexit, how we deal with the arrangements with Europe in the future, and what our points and our values are, and also what the anger is of people in this country in left-behind communities that saw no investment, that saw no real jobs, that saw no real growth, who felt an enormous anger that was expressed in the referendum of 2016. And I said very clearly to my colleagues there, please understand, because what's happened in deindustrialised parts of Britain is exactly the same as what's happening in deindustrialised bits of Germany, France, Spain and many other countries all across Europe. The real problem is an economic system that discards industrial workers and allows whole communities to collapse and die, and good jobs to be replaced by employers like Sport Direct. We want and will get something very, very different in the future. But what was also clear to me was the utter exasperation that people have in all sides of opinion all over Europe with Theresa May, because she's arranged a deal with the EU that is simply not acceptable in any way, because that deal doesn't protect the rights, doesn't protect the jobs, doesn't guarantee investment, and doesn't actually protect anything for the future, except, in my view, have the danger of leaving us open to trade deals with other people, such as the United States, that would damage an awful lot of our interests in this country. And at the same time as her deal has been flatly rejected by Parliament in the biggest ever defeat of any government in British history, I have to say to Theresa May, I congratulate you. You've got 2 records already. One of them was to be found in contempt of Parliament as a government. Never happened before in British history. And secondly, to lose a key vote by the biggest ever majority against a government in parliamentary history. I think she should have a 3rd record and be the quickest Prime Minister to resign and call a general election. But what she's doing is trying to run down the clock by saying, well, it's either my deal or the chaos of leaving the EU with no agreement, no deal, no protection whatsoever. Frightening for people in this country, frightening for people working in manufacturing industry with supply chains, frightening for EU nationals in Britain, frightening for British people who live in other parts of the European Union, a large group of whom I met while I was in Spain. Listen, we put forward, I believe, a credible, sensible set of proposals which are about a customs union, are about access to European markets, and are about protecting the conditions on environment, consumers and employment rights, and giving us the opportunity to go much further, because I want full employment protection from day one when you go to work. I want to have better employment rights than we have at the present time. We will be putting those credible alternatives in a motion to Parliament. If Parliament votes for that motion, then we've made progress. That will then have to be negotiated. After that, we can decide how we make the final decision on it. But I tell you this, our priority is to prevent no deal, is to protect jobs, environment, consumers and workers' rights in this country, and a priority I have is to have a relationship with people all across Europe. People in Europe are not my enemies, they're not your enemies. People in Europe are our friends. And I want to live in that kind of open and inclusive society. And that's the message that I put, and the message I will continue to put, because that is absolutely what I believe in. But I believe also in the unity of the labour movement and the unity of our communities. And the unity of our communities is something that is very important. If you look at what is happening across Europe at the present time, there are some very, very frightening trends. The growth of the AfD in Germany, the growth of the far right in Austria, the growth of the far right in Hungary, the growth of anti-Semitic parties in Poland, the growth of the far right across Europe. And the narrative goes something like this. A populist politician turns up and a factory's been closed. They don't blame the owner of the factory. They don't blame free market economics. They don't blame a multinational company that's more interested in moving to the next low-wage regime somewhere else. They instead blame the nearest group of migrant workers who themselves are being exploited in the first place. And populist politicians They can make a bit of progress on that. You can blame this minority, you can blame that minority, you can blame another minority, and you've got through a year or two. And then you've got somebody else to blame. You've got to find somebody else to blame. But what have you actually achieved at the end of that? You've achieved nastiness, you've achieved hatred, you've achieved division. You haven't created a job, you haven't trained a teacher, you haven't built a school, you haven't got a new doctor, you haven't created anything at all. And so it is about the unity of what we achieve together and the way we challenge injustice and inequality in this country and indeed around the world. Bernie Sanders put something very well, and I was really impressed with the way he put it. He said, with the way he does it, he says, Bernie here. Bernie here. America can afford anything. I said, yeah, okay, sure. I'm sure it can. He said, it can afford absolutely anything. We can go to the moon, we can do anything. But we cannot afford the inequality of the USA that leaves 40 million people without access to health care. And what he said was so true, that unless you start to challenge the economic inequality that is in this country, that is all across Europe, that is in the United States, then we are doomed for the future for the sense of social justice and the services we want for the future and the way we want young people to achieve in the future. Gloria made the point about the pay gap between the richest and normal workers in this country. By January the 4th, the top 100 FTSE executives would have earned the equivalent of a year's pay of anybody else. That is 4 days into the year, they've already earned what any of you would have earned in a whole year. And they may not have even got back to work by January the 4th, I don't know. I don't want to intrude on their holiday arrangements, but that is unacceptable. And therefore, what we said in the last manifesto, and we'll say in the next one, is, at the very least, we will use the power of public purchasing by government and local authorities to insist in a pay ratio of no greater than 20:1 in every company we deal with. We will insist in closing the gender pay gap. We will insist on union rights. We will insist on apprenticeships. We will insist on training. We will insist on environmental sustainability. Because that is what the Labour offer is all about. But it's also about how we react to what goes on in society. When people, as I said, are racist towards each other, then we oppose it in any way whatsoever. If anyone is racist towards anyone else in our party, wrong, out of court, out of order, totally and absolutely unacceptable. Anti-Semitism is not acceptable in any form, in any way whatsoever, anywhere within our society. So I'm proud to lead a party that was the first ever to introduce race relations legislation and also to pass the Equality Act and the Human Rights Act into the statute book. And we're going to take all these issues further forward. And that is what is being proposed by Diane as our Shadow Home Secretary and Dawn Butler as our Shadow Equalities Minister. There will be more extensive and tougher anti-discrimination laws in Britain. We want to live in a better and decent society. And as we develop our policies up to an election, there's so many exciting ideas there. A national education service, where we take away the principle that education is some kind of commodity you buy and sell and trade. Let's make it a right to be educated, a right to learn, a right to know. And my old friend Tony Benn put it so well once. He said, education should be there for life whenever you want to access it. He said it should be like an escalator, you can get on and off when it's suitable for you. So we will raise corporation tax in order to end university and college fees. We will end fees for adult education, and we'll properly fund our schools. And through the National Education Service, we will bring back the family of local schools rather than the competition between academies and free schools and our local schools. That has to be the right way forward. And these policies are worked out from the wishes of our members and our supporters. So when we come to a general election, we will have constructed a policy programme that is popular, that everyone has contributed to. People in meetings all over the country discussing how you'd bring the private rented sector under better regulation and control, how you build more council housing, how you ensure that homelessness, street homelessness, ends altogether in this country, how we bring about a living wage, how we end the concept of Food Bank Britain. All these things will be there in that manifesto. But you want a Labour government? I want a Labour government. We're determined to get a Labour government. We're determined to challenge this government to achieve it. That means unity within our party to do it. That means going out there to campaign to do it. Gloria gave you the call to be canvassing this afternoon in Ashfield. Please join her. But it's also about how we live our lives, how we relate to our neighbours and our communities. Because as you may have noticed, some of the mainstream media are sometimes slightly hostile and critical. I've noticed it. And what I've noticed is they're very unkeen on relating to the issues that people face. I did an interview for Sky last night. It was 14 minutes, the interview. We got to, I think, minute 12 before I intervened and said, is there any chance that anybody other than an MP could be referred to in any of your questions? And we could actually talk about the homeless, the poverty, the hospital waiting list. Any chance we could talk about the issues that people face in their day-to-day lives? And that is what we achieved in the election because we went out and did it. That's what we're achieving through our community organising. That's what we're achieving as a party in relating to people. And I'm very proud of that. Later on today, I'll be going to the Women's Conference in Telford. The Women's Conference, first one's a standalone conference. The Labour Party that brought in the Equal Pay Act in the first place will be there, giving women, I hope, a great deal of optimism for the future about ending the gender pay gap, and also many, many other issues that are going to come up there today. But that is the strength of the party, that we're creative, we're imaginative, and we're going to do things together. 2 weeks ago, a lot of school children decided they were going to take action. And they took action because they were worried about climate change. They did it through organising on social media. Nobody told them to do it. Nobody asked them to do it. They did it because they wanted to do it. And they did it incredibly effectively. They were condemned by Tory ministers because they said they should have been at their lessons, they should have been studying, they should have been working, they shouldn't be doing all that. What I simply say to them is, thank you for educating all of us that day as to the seriousness with which you take the issue. Because environmental politics should not be seen as a sort of add-on alternative that's something you just talk about to certain groups and certain audiences. It's a class issue as well. It's working class communities that suffer the most pollution, the worst air quality, the shortest life expectancy, the worst housing conditions. It is a class issue on all of those things. Climate change is obviously massive, and there's no escape from it. However rich you are, there's no escape from climate change, there's no escape from environmental degradation. And therefore it does require a change of attitude, it does demand a change of attitude, and we are the ones that are going to be and are demanding that change of attitude. And I intend to lead a government that will lead the way on that. In the way the last Labour government passed the Climate Change Act, we will go much further on that. We won't be hand-holding with Donald Trump to end the Paris Climate Change Accord. We will be seeking to strengthen it and also look at our environmental policies, our agricultural policies, our food policies for better sustainability, and our energy policies as well. But this is not a threat to anybody. Green energy jobs will grow. There could be 400,000 jobs created by a green energy industry, which is sustainable, good quality jobs, good employment. Technology is not the enemy of the environment. Smart use of technology is the friend and the protector of the environment. And that is the sort of strategy and policy we want to put forward. I just want to say this in conclusion. I want to say this to you. Our party has had an interesting few days. I've had a very interesting week in politics. And I'm obviously sad at some of the things that have been happened and very sad at some of the things that have been said. But I simply say this. Our movement grew out of the most unbelievable hardships of the 18th and 19th century. The way the Industrial Revolution brought farm workers living in poverty as farm workers into cities to live in poverty as industrial workers. They came together in adversity. They came together against the brutality of employers that did not want trade unions to be formed. They came together in adversity to support each other through friendly societies and social clubs. From that whole tradition of working class solidarity grew the trade unions, grew the socialist movement, grew the Chartists, grew so many other fascinating and strong movements, the pioneers of our movement. Those pioneers led the way, and eventually the TUC was founded, eventually the Labour Representation Committee came, eventually the Labour Party was founded, and we stood for election and we fought, and sometimes we won and sometimes we lost, but we made progress. And it was Labour that brought about the National Health Service, Labour that brought about council housing, Labour that brought about equality and human rights legislation, Labour that achieved so much. Walking away from our movement achieves nothing. Not understanding where we've come from is a very bad mistake, because when people come together in a grouping, a community like the Labour Party, there's nothing we can't achieve together for everybody. I do not want to live in a country where we allow racism to thrive, where we allow discrimination against women to continue, where we allow street sleeping to continue, where we allow these desperate levels of poverty to get worse and worse, while the very richest do better and better. I don't want to live in a country that invests hardly anything in the East Midlands compared to what it does in London and the South East. I don't want to live in a country where the Tory minister says to the Mayor of London, who's trying to build more council homes, the big mistake is you're not building enough luxury flats. Sorry, we're overdone with luxury flats. We need houses and flats for people across the whole country. Our party stands for those things. I was just given a letter here as I came in from a young woman, Isabel, aged 7. Dear Jeremy, I've come to see you because I want everything to be fair for everyone, the same as you. Isabel gets the message. Isabel understands what socialism and social justice is about. So, treat the past with respect and go forward to the future with determination, solidarity and optimism of the kind of world we can and will create. Thank you very much.